Albert Breer tweeted the following: "There's nothing more college football than Big 12 schools fighting over penalties for Oklahoma players flashing the horns down sign at Texas players, while Oklahoma and Texas secretly are conspiring to leave the conference together." As we welcome in Albert Breer from the Monday Morning Quarterback. What do you make of this with Texas and Oklahoma thinking about joining the SEC?
I'm more of like a bystander. I love the circus. You know what I mean? Like I just like the absurdity of college football. It's great. And I mean, I guess this is where we're going though, right? Like without being somebody who covers it day to day, it sort of feels like at some point, and I think we've like been talking about this for 15 or 20 years, and I love college football, right? All you got to do is look over my shoulders to see that. But I think this is like where we've been going for a while now, right? Like where eventually all of the big powerhouse schools, the big powerhouse conferences are going to separate themselves from the rest of the sport. And I mean, this feels like that, right?
Yeah. But I wonder what's going to happen with Ohio State, Michigan, Notre Dame, USC, maybe Oregon. You know, you don't want to get left out. It's a game of musical chairs, and then music stops, and you go, wait a minute, what happened? You don't have a chair to sit down on.
But don't you think like the USCs, Michigans, Ohio States, those schools, I think are protected because those are like self-sustaining brands, right? Like I'd be more worried if I was like an Iowa or if I was like a Washington, right? Like the teams that have that are been really, really good in the past, but maybe aren't like self-sustaining brands where they can go out and sell themselves as a singular entity. Like Ohio State and Michigan and USC, they could get Notre Dame television deals, couldn't they? If they wanted to on their own, like probably, right?
Yeah.
Like, so, but those other schools, I think like, that's the thing is it's like, if you're like, say you're Illinois, are you worried about something happening to you similar to what might happen to say Kansas now, right? Like it just sort of feels like that's those would be the schools where I think, you know, that you'd have to be worried about. The big powerhouse brand names, I think are probably going to be okay either way.
And you have probably, and I maintain you're probably going to have 3 super conferences and maybe have 16 teams in each of them. And that's it. You just cap it at that. You know, a program like Vandy, where, you know, they're going to get parting gifts and say, see you later. But imagine if the NFL did this. If all of a sudden you said, hey, we're going to bring in, Robert Kraft goes, let's bring in the Giants. You know, we want them to be part of our conference here. You know, these blue bloods, the Cowboys, how valuable.
Like, I guess that's the way, isn't that the way English soccer works though with relegation?
I love relegation.
Right? Like what if the NFL split into 3 and you had relegation?
Is there any expansion on the horizon with the NFL?
I don't think so. Just because I think the NFL owners are like, so where they are, like they came to a point, I think 15 years ago or so, where it was, we've grown up as much as we can, right? So like domestically, the way the product's been produced over the last, you know, however many decades, like we've maxed that out. And so now we've just got to add inventory, right? So everything was growing out. That's what London is. That's what going back to LA is. That's 17 games, expanding the playoffs, all of those different things. You know, but they've done it within the context of 32 teams. And the key there is that pie that they're talking about. You know, Jerry always says, grow the pie. Well, if you're splitting it 32 ways and you're growing it, and then maybe you're splitting it 34 ways at 36 ways, now you got to grow the pie that much more. So I think if they were ever going to go into like talking about expanding again, like the growth would have to be exponential financially, where, you know, splitting it 34 ways or 36 ways would mean more of a share for each of the teams than splitting it 32 ways. And you're not going to do that by going into some middling market. You know what I mean? Like you have to go to some place that's really going to add a lot of value. So the only way I really see that happening is if it's international.
What about relocation?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you've heard more grousing, I think, over the last maybe decade or so about teams pulling their weight, you know, and the Cincinnatis of the world, and, you know, how like Buffalo had the owner's name in the stadium for that long, and how Cincinnati still has the name of the founder of the team in the stadium and how they're not like doing rights deals. They're not pulling every lever financially, and they're dragging the other teams down to begin with because they're smaller markets. So could we eventually get there? Maybe. I think what's protected a lot of those teams has been the stadium boom. And so many of those stadiums are like relatively new. And so, like Indianapolis, for example, would be a city where you would look and you would say, all right, like, is this city pulling its weight? Well, they built a stadium a little over 10 years ago. So I think like the idea of moving those teams with LA off the table now really becomes a matter of when those stadiums sort of age out. And I think we're still a ways away from that. Like Cincinnati Stadium's 20 years old now. And I'm not picking on the Bengals, but there are stadiums that are getting a little older now. When those stadiums are 30, 35 years old, maybe we're talking about something else. Again, my caveat on that would be the same, where the international part of it, I think, could come into play, where a city, we've talked about Jacksonville forever. Like whenever they're ready to go to London, I think that's in a different category than moving a team domestically.
We're talking Albert Breer, the senior NFL reporter for the Monday Morning Quarterback. What intrigued you out of Cowboys camp yesterday with Jerry Jones? Anything catch your attention?
Yeah, the Jimmy Johnson thing, definitely. I mean, and I know that's not about the here and the now, but the fact that, he basically conceded they're going to put him in the Ring of Honor. I don't think most people know that Jimmy's not in the Ring of Honor in Dallas.
I know.
Which just seems absurd, right?
Yeah, that seems a little petty.
Yeah. So, I mean, the fact that he conceded, and I think he said that like he doesn't want to do it this year because they want to honor Jimmy for getting in the Hall of Fame this year. So they want to do a separate ceremony for it, which is fair. But the fact that he's conceding that it's going to be done got my attention. Now, as far as like the here and the now and the Cowboys like today, I think Mike McCarthy saying that Dak Prescott's full go is huge, because I can remember when that injury happened, and I can remember talking to people in January and February where there was definitely some quiet concern. I mean, I guess even just how Dak was moving around at that point, and so this was more, I think, this was more than like a torn ACL or somebody blowing out their Achilles. Like this was something where there weren't a ton of guarantees on what he was going to look like coming back. So I think the fact that he's full go for the start of training camp is enormous news, even if it's what we expected all along.
Then you got Steelers camp. That's opened up, and those two will meet in the Hall of Fame game. I still go back to the Steelers went all in on improving their running game. And I didn't know if that's really what they needed to improve upon. And you could get a running back, and we've devalued running backs. I like Najee Harris, but do I like him at that spot for the Steelers? That it came as a little bit of a surprise. How about you?
Yeah, and I think a piece of that is like the need to take the pressure off of Ben Roethlisberger's shoulders. Like I think it's an acknowledgement he can't carry the team anymore, and in a lot of ways, I mean, I guess the parallel you could, draw us to the 90s Broncos, what Terrell Davis did for John Elway at the end of his career. I think they feel like Ben Roethlisberger because of his experience, the inventory he has mentally, his big game experience, all that different stuff. Like they can still win with him, but he can't carry the team anymore. And so, I think that it's an acknowledgement, like, we're pretty good at receiver. And if we get him a back and we create easy completions for him, he's going to take less hits. And so the equation there for Mike Tomlin and Kevin Colbert was like, how can we make it so this is less about Ben Roethlisberger and more about the team around him lifting him up? Now, the one thing that I think everybody has sort of glossed over the last 6 months, Alejandro Villanueva's gone, David DeCastro's gone, Maurkice Pouncey's gone. And Mike Munchak, who was the line coach who put all of that together 5 years ago, is gone too. So I think so much of where the Steelers go is going to ride on their ability to support Ben Roethlisberger and not ask too much of Ben Roethlisberger at his age. I think getting Najee Harris was a piece of that. The bigger question to me is, can they fix the offensive line on the fly? And the Steelers have earned the benefit of the doubt when it comes to drafting and developing, but there's going to be a lot of pressure on a couple of young guys up front to get it done.
The team that had the best offseason, the team that had the worst offseason?
The team that had the best offseason, I would say the team that had the best offseason, God, I would almost go Rams, but they just lost Cam Akers, so it would seem like I just, I don't know. I have a hard time going with them. And the Bucs are an easy answer because they bring everybody back. I'm going to give you a little bit of a curveball. I'm going to say the Chargers. I like their head coach a lot, Brandon Staley. And I think they quietly fixed their offensive line in a very pragmatic way where they didn't overreach for anybody. They got, I think, guy who some people would argue is the best center in the league, Corey Linsley.
Yeah.
And they drafted a left tackle in Rashawn Slater, who no one thought was going to be there at 13. So they got good value in free agency. They got good value at left tackle. They were able to fix both of those spots without going crazy. And then on top of that, they lose Hunter Henry at tight end, but I think you could argue if Jared Cook stays healthy, he could be an upgrade at that position. So I just look at them and what they've done to support their young quarterback, Justin Herbert. I think the Chargers had an awfully good offseason. Bad offseason, Houston. I like a lot of what Nick Caserio has done there, but I think going through what you went through with Deshaun Watson, all of the stuff with with Jack Easterby, I think that you put a lot on the plate of David Culley in his first year in Houston. So I think it's hard to answer it any other way than it's the Houston Texans who had the toughest offseason. Now, I think Nick Caserio has a chance to be a brilliant general manager. So he's got a chance to turn it around. I think he brought some really underrated, competitive free agents into the building, but I don't know how that's better than a 3 or 4 win team, which, I mean, look, you win 3 or 4 games. If you're competitive and you're able to establish something program wise, maybe you trade Deshaun Watson for a king's ransom. And then, we get to April and they're looking at Spencer Rattler and Sam Howell and all those different guys in the draft. So, I mean, part of it's sort of where the franchise is, but I don't think you'd argue they had a very good offseason based on everything that happened.
Always great to talk to you, Albert. Thank you. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
That's Albert Breer, senior NFL reporter. He's the lead content strategist for the Monday Morning Quarterback.